There is a part of you that you have spent your entire life trying not to meet. It hides beneath your smiles, behind your ambitions, under the voice that insists you must always stay in control. You sense it sometimes, in the moments when anger flares without reason, when jealousy surprises you, when fear whispers louder than logic. And yet each time it rises, you push it back down, terrified of what it might say about you. Carl Jung called this hidden region of the psyche the shadow, everything within us that we refuse to see, not only our shame and rage, but also our disowned strength, creativity, and desire. The shadow is not evil. It is simply what has been banished from awareness. It is the unlived life, the unspoken truth, the rejected self. Most people believe their greatest enemy is outside them. They fight the world, other people, circumstance. But Jung saw that the real struggle is internal, between the self we show and the self we hide. The parts we deny do not disappear. They wait. And when they are ignored long enough, they begin to rule us from the dark. You can feel this conflict in the unease that follows your proudest moments, the subtle guilt after success, the emptiness after applause. The persona shines brighter, but the shadow grows heavier. The more we polish our image, the more darkness collects beneath it. The tragedy is that we are taught to fear this darkness as if it were corruption. We grow up believing that good means pleasant, polite, pure, and that everything else must be erased. But the psyche does not obey moral cosmetics. It wants wholeness, not perfection. The qualities we exile do not die. They become distorted. The anger you repress becomes bitterness. The fear you deny becomes control. The desire you suppress becomes addiction. And all the while, the true self, the one beyond good and bad, suffocates under the weight of what you refuse to face. Jung warned that what we resist in ourselves eventually appears in the outer world, forcing us to confront it through circumstance, conflict, or relationship. Until you make the unconscious conscious, he wrote, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. That is the cruel irony. The part of you you fear most already rules you. You obey it in silence, shaping your choices around avoidance, never realizing that the enemy you run from is your own reflection. But here lies the secret that few ever discover. The shadow is not trying to destroy you. It is trying to wake you. It is the voice of everything real within you that has been locked away by fear. The enemy within is not darkness. It is potential disguised as threat. And the moment you turn toward it instead of away, you begin to sense its true nature. Because sometimes what we call the devil inside is simply the part of the soul that refuses to stay in chains. The shadow is not born in darkness. It is born in light. It begins the moment we first learn what is good and what is bad, what earns love and what brings rejection. As children, we come into the world whole, a constellation of impulses, emotions, and instincts, all equally alive. But the world does not welcome wholeness. It rewards only fragments, the polite ones, the obedient ones, the parts that make others comfortable. So the division begins. When you were praised for being calm, you learned to hide your anger. When you were loved for being kind, you buried your aggression. When you were rewarded for being humble, you suppressed your pride. Piece by piece, the full spectrum of your humanity was split in two. The part that could be shown and the part that must remain unseen. Carl Jung described this process as moral adaptation, the necessary adjustment every individual makes to live within a social order. It is not a mistake. It is how consciousness evolves. To exist in society, we must develop a persona, a social face. But every mask casts a shadow. Everything that doesn't fit behind the mask is pushed into the unconscious where it waits. At first, this seems harmless. You forget what you've hidden. You grow into your role. The helpful one, the strong one, the gentle one, the achiever. The world praises you for your consistency. But deep inside, another self begins to form. The sum of all that was denied. It grows not in malice, but in exile. The shadow is the price of adaptation. It is born each time you say, I'm fine, when you are breaking. Each time you smile through resentment. Each time you choose approval over truth. You do not realize that every rejection of the self plants a seed of rebellion within. The emotions you suppress do not vanish. They go underground. They build pressure. And one day, when the persona falters, they rise. This is why the people who seem most in control often carry the deepest chaos within. The saint hides envy. The healer hides rage. The perfectionist hides despair. Every virtue has its hidden twin. Jung wrote that one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The birth of the shadow is therefore not a tragedy. It is an opportunity. It is the psyche's way of preserving what consciousness cannot yet accept. Your hidden anger becomes the root of your power. Your forbidden desire becomes the source of your vitality. Your repressed pain becomes the key to your compassion. The shadow holds everything that was too much for love, too dangerous for belonging. But it is also the archive of your wholeness. It remembers the parts of you that your ego was forced to forget. So when you feel its presence, the discomfort, the shame, the irrational fear, understand what is truly happening. The rejected self is knocking at the door, asking not to be destroyed but to be let back in. The shadow is born the day you learn to hide who you are, and it begins to die the day you decide to meet yourself again. What we repress does not disappear, it organizes. The shadow, once buried, does not sleep quietly. It begins to weave itself through our choices, our moods, our relationships. What we refuse to face in consciousness returns in disguise. It hides behind our virtues, our ambitions, even our faith. Jung called this the tyranny of repression, the silent dictatorship of the unconscious over the life that tries to deny it. You think you have mastered your anger because you never raise your voice, but it returns as resentment, poisoning your silence. You think you have tamed your fear because you act brave, but it returns as anxiety, haunting your body when the lights go out. You think you have conquered your desire because you suppress it, but it returns in secret fantasies that make you ashamed of your own longing. Repression is not control. It is avoidance wearing discipline's mask. It does not create peace. It builds pressure. And when that pressure becomes unbearable, it bursts. Sometimes it bursts in private, in breakdowns, addictions, sudden tears. Sometimes it bursts in public, in cruelty, hypocrisy, judgment, the moral outrage that attacks in others what we cannot face in ourselves. Jung called this projection, the act of casting our disowned traits onto the world where we can hate them safely from a distance. We despise arrogance because it reminds us of the pride we're not allowed to feel. We condemn weakness because it mirrors the vulnerability we've buried. We mock sensitivity because it threatens the numbness we mistake for strength. The more we repress, the more fragmented we become. The conscious self tries to remain pure, but the unconscious grows heavier, darker, louder. The human soul cannot live in constant censorship. When one part of you is silenced, another part begins to scream. This is why so many lives collapse without warning. The sudden affair, the addiction, the outburst, the illness that seems to come from nowhere. They are not random. They are eruptions of the shadow. The psyche's way of saying you can no longer live as half a person. Repression is seductive because it looks like virtue. Society praises restraint, composure, positivity. But every exaggerated virtue hides its opposite. The person obsessed with morality hides temptation. The one obsessed with self-control hides chaos. The one obsessed with helping others hides despair. The greater the effort to appear flawless, the more violent the shadows return. Jung warned that when the unconscious is ignored too long, it forces confrontation through suffering. What we refuse to integrate inwardly manifests outwardly as fate. You can spend a lifetime running from the shadow, but it will follow you into every relationship, every success, every failure, because it is you. You cannot escape what you are made of. Repression is not safety. It is slow self-destruction. It cuts you in half and then convinces you that the smaller half is whole. But there is a mercy in the tyranny. It cannot last forever. The human soul was not designed to live divided. Eventually the walls crack. The forbidden emotions begin to seep through. And what feels like collapse is in truth a beginning. The unconscious demanding to be seen, to be felt, to be brought back into the circle of your being. The tyranny of repression ends the moment you stop asking, how do I get rid of this? And start asking, what is this trying to show me? That question is the first act of freedom. The shadow does not only live inside you, it walks beside you wearing the faces of others. Every time someone irritates you without reason, every time you despise a quality in another person that has nothing to do with you, every time you feel an instinctive dislike that logic cannot explain, that is the shadow at work. It has found a mirror. Projection is the psyche's most subtle trick. It allows us to deny the parts of ourselves we cannot face by pretending they belong to someone else. The ego remains innocent while the unconscious continues its work behind the scenes. We say they are arrogant, they are selfish, they are manipulative, never realizing that the accusation is a confession in disguise. Jung warned that the qualities we most condemn in others are often the ones we secretly fear within ourselves. Hatred becomes the mirror of hidden resemblance. The more violently we reject something, the more certain it is that we are confronting our own reflection. This is why conflict, though painful, is psychologically sacred. Every encounter that provokes us reveals an unintegrated aspect of our own nature. The person who intimidates you might embody the confidence you repress. The one you envy may express the desire you've forbidden yourself to feel. The one you judge may simply be living out the freedom you fear to claim. We like to think we see others clearly, but we rarely do. We see our projections, distorted fragments of ourselves dressed in other people's skin. The world in this sense is not a stage but a mirror maze. Every reflection is an invitation. Here is something you have not yet accepted in yourself. The ego, of course, resists this truth. It prefers to live in the illusion of moral superiority. It clings to the belief that I am good and they are not, because that separation protects it from the discomfort of introspection. But projection is never a one-way act. What you reject in others, you strengthen in yourself. The more you attack your reflection, the darker it grows. This is why collective hatred, prejudice, fanaticism, war always begins in individual denial. The shadow, when unacknowledged in the individual, expands through groups, nations, ideologies. What begins as personal repression becomes collective possession. Jung observed this in the rise of totalitarian movements in his time. Societies overtaken by their own unclaimed darkness. But there is another possibility. If you can pause in the moment of judgment, if you can ask, what in me reacts so strongly to this? Then projection transforms into revelation. The mirror ceases to be an accusation and becomes a teacher. Each reflection becomes a chance to reclaim something lost. You realize that the arrogance you despise in another may contain the assertiveness you need. The envy you feel may reveal the unlived potential that longs for expression. The person you cannot forgive may carry the wound you have not forgiven in yourself. The mirror of others is not punishment, it is medicine. It reveals the blind spots of your soul, the corners where light has not yet entered. When you begin to see others this way, compassion replaces judgment. You no longer divide the world into good and evil. You begin to recognize the same struggle in everyone, the war between the persona and the shadow, between who we pretend to be and who we are. To see the shadow in others is easy. To recognize it as your own is liberation.
There comes a moment when the mirror is no longer enough. You grow tired of reflection, of theory, of knowing about your darkness without ever meeting it. Something inside you begins to ache, a deep, wordless pull toward the unknown. You feel it in sleepless nights, in the dull exhaustion of pretending, in the quiet conviction that you can no longer live at a distance from yourself. This is the moment Jung called the descent, the soul's decision to turn inward and face what it has spent a lifetime avoiding. It is not a choice made by the mind, it is demanded by the psyche. Life begins to conspire toward it. Circumstances collapse, relationships fall apart, meaning evaporates. Everything you used to rely on stops working. The old methods of escape fail one by one until there is nowhere left to run except down. The descent is not poetic when you are living it. It feels like failure, depression, loneliness. It feels like being buried alive. But in truth, you are being led not downward into ruin, but inward into reality. Jung compared this process to the myth of the hero's journey. Every descent into the underworld is a preparation for rebirth, but the hero of psychology does not slay dragons, he meets them. The dragons are not monsters. They are parts of himself that were banished, waiting to be acknowledged. At first, the darkness is unbearable. The mind, accustomed to control, cannot navigate here. Logic dissolves. Certainties collapse. The ego thrashes in confusion, insisting that this must be fixed, cured, escaped. But the soul whispers, stay. To descend is to surrender. To stop struggling against what you feel and begin listening to it. In the beginning, you may meet the obvious ghosts, guilt, anger, fear, but as you keep descending, subtler figures appear. Envy disguised as ambition, pride disguised as humility, the need to be loved disguised as selflessness. The deeper you go, the more masks fall away, until you face the one truth that both terrifies and frees you, that nothing you find here is foreign. Every shadow is yours. This recognition is the beginning of integration. You see that your rage is not evil. It is passion that has lost its voice. Your fear is not weakness. It is sensitivity that was never protected. Your shame is not corruption. It is the memory of love denied. To meet these aspects is to reclaim the energy that was once bound in repression. Every confrontation brings a small resurrection. You start to feel less divided, less at war. The darkness does not vanish, but it begins to move with you rather than against you. Jung often said that no tree can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. The descent is how those roots are formed. By touching your own depths, you give your life depth. You stop floating on the surface of personality and start anchoring yourself in being. But this is not an intellectual exercise. The shadow cannot be studied into submission. It must be felt. You must enter the silence, the grief, the rage, not to drown in them, but to let them speak. The unconscious reveals itself through emotion, image, and dream. To descend is to learn its language, to sit in the dark until you can see by another kind of light. It is here, in this quiet, that something miraculous begins to happen. The fear that once defined your relationship to the shadow begins to soften. You realize that what you call darkness is not trying to harm you, it is trying to return you to yourself. The descent is not punishment, it is initiation. You are not falling apart, you are falling in.
When you descend far enough into the darkness, something begins to shift. The monsters start to change shape. What once terrified you now seems strangely familiar. You realize that these figures, your anger, your envy, your grief, are not demons, but exiled parts of your own being. They were never trying to destroy you, they were trying to be heard. Integration begins the moment you stop fighting what you feel. It does not mean glorifying pain or indulging the shadow, but listening to it, translating its symbols into truth. You start to understand that every emotion has a message. Every impulse has a purpose. Rage, when understood, becomes clarity. Fear, when faced, becomes sensitivity. Desire, when accepted, becomes vitality. The very forces that once fractured you now become the energy that restores you. This is what Jung meant by holding the tension of the opposites. The goal is not to choose light over dark or good over bad, but to let both exist without tearing you apart. The conscious and the unconscious must learn to speak to one another, not as enemies, but as partners in the work of wholeness. Integration is delicate work. It is not a triumph, but a conversation. You do not conquer the shadow, you befriend it. You give it a seat at the table of your life. You let it speak its truth, and in return, you teach it language. This is how chaos becomes consciousness. In practice, it looks like this. You no longer shame yourself for your emotions, you inquire into them. You no longer run from conflict, you look for what it reveals. You no longer reject discomfort, you see it as communication from the deeper layers of the soul. The split between who you are and who you pretend to be begins to close. You notice that authenticity no longer feels dangerous. You can express anger without cruelty, desire without shame, sadness without despair. What once ruled you from the dark now moves through you with purpose. Jung described this process as alchemy, the transformation of psychic lead into gold. The raw material of the shadow, when brought into consciousness, becomes wisdom. You discover that nothing within you was ever truly wasted. Every wound, every mistake, every forbidden impulse was carrying energy. And that energy, once redeemed, fuels your becoming. But integration also demands humility. You cannot domesticate the unconscious. You can only relate to it. The ego must give up its fantasy of control and become a servant of balance. This surrender is not weakness, it is maturity. The integrated person is not the one without darkness, but the one who knows how to walk with it. You start to see that wholeness is not a steady state, but a living dialogue. Some days you move in harmony, other days you fall back into conflict. But even when you stumble, you do so consciously. You know now that falling is part of the rhythm, descent and return, light and dark, inhale and exhale. This awareness changes everything. You no longer fear your complexity. You no longer apologize for your contradictions. You begin to live with the kind of depth that only comes from having touched your own underworld. Integration does not make you pure, it makes you real, and reality once feared becomes your sanctuary. You realize finally that freedom was never about transcending the shadow. It was about bringing it home. The light that once blinded you now shines from within the very darkness you feared. And for the first time, you begin to feel whole. When the shadow has been faced and integrated, life itself begins to change tone. The struggle between what you show and what you hide softens. You stop living as a divided being, constantly switching masks to match the moment. A quiet coherence begins to emerge. Not perfection, but alignment. For the first time, you feel like a single person instead of a collection of contradictions. This is the liberation Jung called individuation. Not the pursuit of happiness, but the realization of wholeness. It is the state of being in which nothing within you needs to be exiled any longer. Every part, light or dark, has a place. You are not at war with yourself. You are a living dialogue between opposites, and that dialogue has become peace. Wholeness is not a feeling of constant harmony. It is a relationship with reality that no longer requires denial. You can look at your flaws without collapsing into shame. You can acknowledge your strength without falling into arrogance. You can feel joy without fearing its end, and grief without believing it will last forever. You are no longer pulled apart by the extremes of emotion, because you recognize them as expressions of the same energy. The integrated self walks differently through the world. You listen more than you speak. You respond rather than react. You see through the masks of others without judgment, because you remember wearing them yourself. Compassion arises naturally, not as virtue, but as recognition. You know what it costs to be human. This freedom is subtle. It does not shout. It moves quietly through the ordinary moments of life, in how you breathe, how you speak, how you pause before responding. You begin to sense the intelligence of the psyche at work in everything, guiding you through intuition instead of impulse. You no longer chase purpose. You participate in it. The world no longer appears as a battlefield of good and evil, but as a vast interplay of forces seeking balance. You stop trying to fix people and start meeting them where they are. You understand now that what we call evil is often the unlived potential of the soul. The cruelty of others becomes less personal, not excusable but comprehensible. You recognize it as the same pain you once carried when you were still running from yourself. To live this way is to live from the center, the place where opposites meet. Jung described it as the self, the organizing principle of the psyche that holds all contradictions within it. When you live from that center, life becomes less about control and more about communion. The mind stops demanding certainty. The heart stops demanding rescue. You begin to trust the mystery that once terrified you. Wholeness does not make you superhuman. On the contrary, it makes you profoundly human. You still feel fear, anger, desire, but now they move through you instead of ruling you. You do not suppress them or glorify them. You simply recognize them as visitors, not masters. There is a lightness in this way of living, not because the darkness is gone, but because it has been accepted. The energy once wasted in hiding can now be used for creation, love, and presence. Freedom, you realize, was never the absence of shadow. It was the ability to walk with it consciously. The person who integrates their darkness becomes luminous, not because they shine above the world, but because they are no longer afraid to stand within it. You look back at your life, the repression, the collapse, the descent, and see that every moment was necessary. Each fragment of suffering was a thread leading you home. The part of you you feared most did not imprison you. It was the key in disguise. And now with that key in hand, you walk freely, not into a perfect life, but into a real one. If you have walked with these words until now, then you already feel it. That quiet trembling inside you when truth begins to move. It is not fear anymore, though it still feels like it. It is recognition. The part of you that you have spent years avoiding has heard its name spoken aloud, and it is answering. This is your invitation. Do not run from the darkness that calls you. Do not rush to fix it, silence it, or cleanse it. Sit with it. Listen. That trembling you feel when anger rises, when shame burns, when jealousy tightens your chest, that is not corruption. It is life trying to return to you. It is the unlived part of your soul asking for permission to exist again. Jung said, "The gold is in the dark." He meant that the very qualities you fear most, your rage, your envy, your desire, your sorrow, are the raw materials of your transformation. To deny them is to deny your own depth. To face them is to begin to live. You were not meant to be pure. You were meant to be whole. And wholeness is messy. It includes the nights you regret, the words you wish you hadn't said, the moments when you failed to love. But it also includes the courage that allowed you to look at those moments instead of running from them. The world will tell you to stay bright, to stay positive, to keep your image intact. But life is not asking for your image. It's asking for your truth. It doesn't want your performance. It wants your participation. The shadow is not your enemy. It is your buried wisdom, your instinct, your fire. To embrace it is to reclaim the energy you have been using to pretend. When you bring light into the places you fear, you don't become perfect. You become real. And in being real, you become free. You will know that you have begun this work when you can look at your flaws and feel tenderness instead of shame. When you can see darkness not as punishment, but as initiation. When you can stop asking, "How can I get rid of this part of me?" and start asking, "What is this part trying to show me?" That shift from rejection to relationship is the birth of consciousness. It is how the unconscious becomes light. So here at the end, I offer you no promise of eternal peace, no secret to happiness. Only this, that freedom lies on the other side of honesty, that your fear is not a wall, it's a doorway. And if this journey has stirred something in you, if for even a moment you've seen that your darkness was never the enemy, then stay close to that realization. Protect it. Let it grow. Subscribe to this channel not for more words, but as a commitment to keep listening to yourself, to keep meeting what's real, to keep walking toward wholeness. And when the video ends, don't move too quickly. Close your eyes. Take a breath. Ask yourself, what part of me have I been running from? Then, when the answer comes, as a whisper, an image, or a tear, don't turn away. That is the part that can set you free.